Good evening et bonsoir. Welcome to tonight's lecture. My name is Carolyn Quinn, and I'm a member of Heritage Ottawa's Lecture Series Committee, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our annual Emerging Scholars Connect event. This evening, Carleton University graduate students will share the Azrieli School of Architecture and Urbanism's contribution to an important 5-year collaborative project with 13 other universities across Canada called Quality in the Built Environment, Roadmaps to Equity, Social Value, and Sustainability. Carleton is the only participating university that is focusing on the reuse of existing buildings, and the case studies we'll be hearing about this evening look at the benefits and challenges of adaptive reuse. Heritage Ottawa is a proud community partner in support of this important study. Before we get started, I'd like to give some thanks. Our lecture series is made possible by the generosity of our sponsor, Andrex Holdings Incorporated and Sandy Smallwood. Andrex has been a faithful sponsor of these free lectures, as well as of our walks and some publications. We are also grateful for an operations grant from the City of Ottawa and a small heritage grant from the province of Ontario. I just want to also say a word about membership. Heritage Ottawa is a member-based organization, and we're asking you to consider supporting Heritage Ottawa by becoming a member, or by renewing your membership if you've been a member, or by making a donation. Having a membership is really the simplest way of having a real measurable impact on heritage conservation in Ottawa, and donations help us offer programming such as this lecture for free. And right now, your support is more important than ever. It's only by having people, the public, you, behind us, that we can continue to be heard as we respond to challenging issues, such as the federal government's Bill C-23 regarding the Historic Places of Canada Act, as well as more local issues like the Central Experimental Farm and Lansdowne 2.0. Your help does make a difference. And also, being a member of Heritage Ottawa connects you with a really agreeable community of like-minded people who are interested in and care about and are often passionate about our history and heritage and the quality of the built environment in the city. So if you are already a member and have made a donation, we extend our heartfelt thanks. And if not, I urge you to go ahead. Just go to our membership page on the website at heritageottawa.org, a click of a mouse and your credit card, and you're a member of this community. Ottawa is at the heart of a vast homeland whose history reaches back long before the eras that we will be discussing today. For hundreds of years, Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples have been pressing for their Indigenous rights to be respected and their history to be understood. Heritage Ottawa makes efforts through its programs and partnerships to bring awareness to Algonquin history and heritage through its lectures and activities. It is now a real pleasure to introduce Research Chair Professor Mariana Esponda of Carleton University's Azrieli School of Architecture and Urbanism, who will introduce the Quality in the Built Environment project and the presenting students. Professor Esponda has been an associate professor and the coordinator of the Conservation and Sustainability program at Carleton since 2008. Following her training as an architect in Mexico, she obtained a PhD at the Polytech University of Catalonia in Spain. And for the past 22 years, Professor Esponda has been working on heritage buildings in both the private and public sectors, in North America as well as Spain. Her projects have included the restoration of historic facades, adaptive reuse of churches, monasteries, and industrial buildings. Her research has also focused on developing studies of the interaction between traditional techniques and new materials in heritage buildings, with a special focus on rehabilitation through contemporary interventions and uses. Dr. Esponda is a strong proponent of building reuse as a key measure toward meeting the challenges of climate change. Tonight's presenters have agreed to take some questions at the end of the presentation, so please type your questions into the Q&A function, which is on the lower part of most of your screens. Heritage Ottawa board member Robert Pajot will be coming on screen at that time to moderate the questions. So I'm now going to hand it over to you, Mariana Esponda.
Thank you very, very much. Caroline, and thank you also because Heritage Ottawa is one of our partners. So I thought that that is very, very important to have the support for all this. If you can share the slides, please, so that I can start explaining. It's coming. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Perfect. So next one, please. So for today, we are going to be presenting two students, Dana Mastrangelo and Melissa Lengis. But as you can see, this is a Carleton research team that is with Federica Goffi and Professor Mario Santana from the School of Architecture and Engineering. And so far, we have 6 graduate researchers. Next. So this shared grant qualities is a project that started in 2022. It's a 5-year partnership and is bringing together 14 Canadian universities in 4 research clusters and approximately 70 to 80 researchers and 75 public and private organizations. So this is the 4 research clusters. The one that we are focused is the integrated resilience, material culture, and adaptive reuse. This partnership grant, Quality in Canada Built Environment, is an initiative that stimulates a vital dialogue on how our approach to the built environment can contribute to redefining quality in terms of heightened equity, better social value, and greater sustainability at a critical moment for our societies and our planet. As one of the few universities focuses on existing building, specifically this research cluster seeks to determine the potential benefits of building reuse, assessing how to achieve quality design, and avoiding the waste of vast amounts of material and embodied energy. So in this slide that you are seeing, here you can see all the 14 universities and specifically which of the areas are intertwined. Next one. So this is one of the image of the research partners. In one of the sites, these are the partners that we have. So some of our partners include citizen groups, professional organization, government agency, industry partners, and several architectural firms. So if you want to be part of this research as a partner, please let us know at the end. That would be fantastic to have it. So Carleton Research explores the upsurge in vacant and underutilized buildings due to decline of certain buildings typologies, such as office, schools, sacred structures, and industrial buildings, which pair with a linear economy, reinforced trends of demolition and new construction. One of the main questions that we have been doing with this research is, what is quality in adaptive reuse? How are adaptive reuse projects awarded? What are the barriers and the drivers to reuse? What policies and incentives directly or indirectly impact reuse projects? And which are the synergies those adaptive reuse provides socially, cultural, economical, and environmental? Next, please. So today's agenda, we have divided in 3 main parts. So we are going to be talking what we have found about adaptive reuse, what is the quality in the built environment so far, how do awards measure quality. We will thus briefly introduce our working definition of adaptive reuse and quality, and then we will share how this applies from a practical perspective through our developing inventory and case studies. In the second part, theoretically, we are looking specifically about those benefits and barriers and opportunities of reuse. And then we are going to be talking in practical the case studies that we have been doing researching in the last months with the students. Something that is important is also like recent and coming events that we have participated and the lessons learned. So now I'm going to be introducing two of the research students that have been working very, very hard. It's Melissa Lenges. It's a recent graduate of the Master of Architectural program at Carleton University. Melissa, if you can turn on your camera, would be great so that they can start seeing you. And she holds a Bachelor of Architecture specializing in heritage conservation and sustainability. She also has prior experience in both the public and private sectors, providing heritage and design services in the National Capital Region. In her graduate study, Melissa continues to focus on heritage conservation and adaptive reuse in its role and social and climate action through two grants, the NSERC Create Heritage Engineering and the Shared Research Grant on Quality. Her focus within the grant research has been on regulatory aspects which directly or indirectly impact the feasibility and quality of adaptive reuse. Melissa just finished her thesis focused on how adaptive reuse can contribute to equitable development in the cultural specific context of Montreal Chinatown. Very important topic. And how conservation-based efforts synergies with socio-cultural, environment, and economic goals. Another research student that is joining us is Dana Mastrangelo. She's also a recent alumna of Carleton University, Master of Architectural program, having previously earned a Bachelor of Science in Architecture from McGill University. She has had the privilege of presenting the shared grant research in an international symposium in Belgium just last month, called As Found. These symposiums not only provide a platform for disseminating the insights garnered from the shared grant sponsored research, but also catalyze a vital discourse surrounding the Canadian perspective on the theories and practice of adaptive reuse with the national built environment. Dana's master thesis developed a teaching tool for architects to draw movement within architectural representation, thereby fostering the creation of inheritable, adaptable architectural solutions. Beyond her academic pursuits, Dana professional experience lies through her work as an architectural designer, graphic designer, and visual arts in Montreal, Quebec. So this is the two students that they are going to be presenting right now. But as I said, we have been 6 students. So this is a work of the 6 research students, but also the colleagues that have been working and all the partners. This has been a very a great platform for exchange knowledge. So now, Melissa, is your turn. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mariana. So I'll start by introducing adaptive reuse as we've been using it for our research. So while the term adaptive reuse is often used interchangeably with terms like rehabilitation, renovation, and restoration to refer to the renewal of an existing building or even a space within a building to meet modern demands, our working definition of adaptive reuse has been, for the purposes has been specifically looking at cases in which a building undergoes a change in use from one functional typology to another. For example, when a school is converted to multifamily residential or an industrial building is converted to a restaurant. Our society undergoes changes, and so does our built environment. So in recent decades, and especially in the past few years, this has meant a decline of certain building typologies that are no longer as relevant as they once were. This includes the typologies like churches, industrial buildings, and office buildings, which once formed defining pieces of our environment and now are lying vacant in many cities. From a heritage perspective, adaptive reuse is a means of restoring and breathing life into the old, conserving history through layers of newfound relevancy. But from a simply practical standpoint, it also means maximizing the utility of existing assets. Adaptive reuse is thus simultaneously a part of heritage conservation, urban regeneration, and sustainable development. So defining quality was a fundamental aspect of our research, as well as we looked at how adaptive reuse contributed to the built environment. So the concept of quality is a multifaceted concept and varies depending on context and perception. When defining quality, our team likes to refer to a quote from the Chartered Institute of Building from 2018 where they state that quality is not just a measure of regulatory compliance or aesthetic appeal. It is about the greater public good we expect from our buildings to promote human health, safety, and well-being, as well as addressing today's many social, cultural, environmental, and economic concerns. Certain essential features of high-quality places include habitability, environmental friendliness, accessibility, inclusiveness, affordability, and the integration into the surrounding environment. The process of assessing quality demands cross-disciplinary discussions, political involvement, and citizens' participation, among many other efforts. It's a complex and evolving concept encompassing many considerations and perspectives. So how do awards measure quality through the lens of adaptive reuse? An indication of quality is often pointed to by architectural awards, where typically projects deemed successful are awarded accordingly. However, this brings to the question of whether our awards are a good indication of quality. Within adaptive reuse, our research has been able to identify certain discrepancies and biases. These biases can, in one way or another, affect how these projects are recognized and appreciated. For instance, there's a tendency to favor iconic or historically significant structures. We often see an overemphasis on preserving history, sometimes at the expense of innovative design. We can see this in heritage too often, where buildings listed as heritage often resist too much change, and then buildings that gain heritage awards are often more conserved than reused. Also, bigger, more expensive projects tend to get awarded more often. Not to mention, we often see a preference for well-known architects or firms and a heavy focus on aesthetics rather than the functionality of the conversion. So to tackle these issues, we need to expand our evaluation criteria and take a broader view of the unique challenges and opportunities in adaptive reuse projects. Current awarding organizations have taken this into account. For instance, during this past decade, Heritage Ottawa has added adaptive reuse as one of its 7 award categories. Although it doesn't erase all biases, this step towards recognizing the adaptation of existing buildings is a critical approach that can raise awareness. So Canada's path towards adaptive reuse has been gaining momentum, as has been reflected in these awards and is also being reflected in other ways as well. There's a growing recognition of its benefits in realms like politics, professions, and just in the general public perception. Throwaway culture still persists in the building and construction industry, just like it does in the rest of our society. But there are promising shifts in research, attitudes, and in practice, which are going towards reuse. In the following slides, I'll share how, compared to demolition and the construction of new buildings, the reuse of existing buildings, whether heritage or not, has been found to provide various benefits to the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit. So while less easily measurable, the retention of existing buildings, especially those which have been around a really long time, are significant contributors to the social and cultural identity of a place, along with its familiarity and people's own sense of belonging to that place. As put by Thompson Mays in his book, Why Old Places Matter, the sense of continuity, memory, and identity that old places provide contributes to people's sense of who they are and their place in the world. This in turn provides an overall sense of emotional stability, which he points out can be lost when we lose the places we formed attachments with, most noticeable in cases of community displacement. As in many neighborhoods, especially historic and ethnic neighborhoods, the built environment acts as a uniting element of communities, representing different cultures, generational stories, and a shared visual identity. By making building retention more mainstream, it provides a means of sensitive development, which preserves the existing relationships within the community. Reuse also provides an opportunity to build layers upon these places, which better reflect modern needs and changing values in the community, while retaining the connection to the past and preserving the existing street character. Building reuse also provides significant environmental benefits and climate action potential. Considering the need to reduce global carbon emissions, it's important that we both use energy and materials more efficiently. Although I don't remember who I heard this from first, we can now take the phrase coined by Carl Elefante one step further to say that the greenest building is the one that is not just already built, but retrofitted. By reusing and retrofitting existing buildings, we're not only reducing the long-term energy consumption, but the short-term waste production. This includes the waste of the most carbon-intensive parts of the building, such as the foundation, the structure, and the building envelope, which are typically retained in building reuse projects. While they may pose different challenges, older buildings can still be adapted as what we consider green buildings, considering the high reduction of upfront carbon, the presence of inherently sustainable features, and their ability to accommodate energy-efficient strategies through innovative solutions. According to the National Trust for Heritage Preservation's 2011 report, The Greenest Building, it takes 10 to 80 years for a new building that is 30% more efficient than the average performing existing building to overcome, through efficient operations, the negative climate change impacts related to the construction process itself. The reuse of existing buildings maximizes their functional potential, reducing tendencies towards urban sprawl and the abandonment of older buildings in pre-existing neighborhoods. Building reuse projects also tend to produce less material waste and air pollution than demolition and new construction, which minimizes the local environmental and health impacts on the surrounding community. An example of a green certified adaptive reuse project in Ottawa is the Wellington building, which achieved Green Globe certification and won CIGBC award for existing buildings. Despite the higher short-term investment, which often discourages adaptive reuse projects, building reuse makes long-term economic sense. Adapted historic buildings can sometimes be valued higher due to their unique character, whether when searching for tenants or when attracting customers to a business. For economic hubs like the Glebe and Hindenburg, as shown here, adapted historic buildings contribute to the recognizable character and vibrancy of the area that people know and love and continue to come back for. Furthermore, at a larger scale, building reuse and heritage conservation boosts the local economy by benefiting local tourism, local trades, and the production of jobs. From a cost perspective, multiple sources, including developers from Toronto and Ottawa that we've spoken with or have read interviews with online, have claimed that the cost of reuse was comparable in some cases or less than new construction, with the possibility of a faster turnaround time due to the fewer approval processes, resulting in less time to the market. They also pointed out that with adequate pre-construction research and investigations as part of just their due diligence and experience working with existing buildings, it was possible to reduce the risk of scope creep and the cost of unknowns, which are often linked to one of the major barriers to working with existing buildings. While it's not always the case, it does go to show that with the strategic selection and thorough understanding of the building as you're approaching that reuse project, it is possible to support an economically feasible business model. So during the past year, we've had many discussions with architects, developers, planners, and community members about the diverse perspectives on drivers and barriers to adaptive reuse. While heritage designation does promote building preservation, policy limitations have been found to hinder their adaptation to modern needs to a sufficient extent, sometimes leading to demolition by neglect as the projects don't go through. So this underscores the necessity to study the successful cases that have overcome these barriers to create these successful projects that we do have. In 2020, the National Trust for Canada published this report titled Making Reuse the New Normal, which detailed the barriers faced by reuse, essentially categorizing them as economic, cultural, technical, and regulatory barriers. So among these many barriers that they go through, within these categories included the lack of knowledge and experience in building reuse for people who are approaching these projects or demanding these projects, the lack of maintenance, construction quality, and inherent adaptability of the existing building stock, which makes it more and more difficult to later on upgrade them. The challenging building features, especially those of older construction or with heritage value and different elements, as well as the counteractive and insufficient policies and incentives that don't take advantage of the pre-existing synergies that they have with other policies and are instead fighting against them in a sense. These policies especially hold back the systematic normalization of reuse, since they often date back to an age where demolition and new construction were the favored direction to go in support of rapid development and modernization for the city. So to this day, we continue to have too many policies which are still working against reuse and not enough incentives which are making it economically viable. So as an example of one of the declining typologies that has garnered attention in recent years, we looked a bit into office buildings as one of our main case studies. So there has been a 17% increase in vacancy rates within Canadian office building stock since the pandemic, which was reported by CBRE, a global leader in commercial real estate services and investments. For office buildings in particular, their conversion to a new use, such as residential, offers many of the potential social benefits that have been listed previously, such as being located in city centers and along transportation routes, which supports those who are coming to the city center and need to be close to all of the amenities. The retention of these high-rise concrete and steel structures also avoids massive amounts of carbon in their demolition and the construction of similar-sized residential high-rises, while also avoiding the need for urban sprawl by injecting the needed housing into the pre-existing underutilized areas. On the other hand, office buildings vary in form and often pose unique challenges, technical challenges relating to their large floor plates, their window placements, and often zoning. But regardless, various firms are developing their own criteria systems to evaluate which office buildings are suitable for residential conversion. One of them being Gensler, which has done a lot of research on office building conversions in recent years. But so far in Ottawa alone, there are 3 known successful conversions, 3 more on the way, and many more in other cities across Canada and in the US. So in order to get a better idea of the recent trends in building reuse, such as the growth of vacant office buildings, our team is spearheading a Canada-wide initiative of recording adaptive reuse projects, which we can use to assess which building typologies may have a better propensity for certain types of conversions and what facilitates those conversions. This includes both heritage and non-heritage buildings and is specific to buildings where it's had a complete change in use. So while our current focus is on completing the database for Ottawa, and so a lot of the case studies that we're going to show are all Ottawa-based, we're also building a larger database for buildings across Canada to compare the different cities and provinces, which is more of a long-term goal for the grant. So we've been collecting entries submitted using a publicly shared online survey we developed, which has been shared in the chat, and from previous lists provided by various organizations and firms in Ottawa that we've been in contact with. So far, our growing database includes over 160 entries across Canada and over 70 projects for Ottawa alone, dating back as far as 1970s, nearly 40% of which are from just the past 10 years, which is our focus for our current analyses of trends going on. The data shows so far that the vast majority of buildings which have been converted held a heritage designation, suggesting that the the role of heritage as a driving force for adaptive reuse in Canada so far. Furthermore, over half of the buildings converted to date were constructed in the first half of the 20th century. The pilot inventory also unveils trends in converted typologies, offering insights into opportunities and the widespread experience within building reuse. So it revealed that there's an emphasis on reusing buildings specifically for characteristic housing projects, commercial developments, and institutional uses, many of which are mostly community centers and event spaces. So to look more closely at how some of these projects have come to be within the current context, we selected a number of case studies which we thought had been very successful from a social, cultural, environmental, and or economic standpoint, some of which are award-winning projects. These were analyzed in more depth through research, site visits, and discussions with their architects and developers. Our main goal was to understand the synergies they were able to take advantage of, as well as the positive impacts they've achieved and the barriers that they've encountered. This was to understand how, what kind of strategies they've come across for overcoming them, and how we can develop recommendations for the changes necessary to enable more similar successful reuse projects. So our methodology, which you'll kind of see expressed through the case studies that we're going to share after, followed the conservation decision-making process from the standards and guidelines published in 2010 by Parks Canada. This means that we assess the full process of the project from the preliminary understanding phase through the planning and intervention phases. We're also additionally looking at the post-occupancy phase, which is kind of a new addition that we've been taking on since we want to recognize the importance of reviewing the real impacts and public perception of the project once it's actually constructed and in use. Each of these phases, we look at how the project team has addressed heritage, social, cultural, environmental, and economic considerations to really get a holistic understanding of what decisions made the project possible and at what point in time they were made. So I'm going to hand this off to Dana, and she's going to continue with the case studies.
Thanks, Melissa. So now we'll take a deep dive into 4 case studies, all located locally within the city of Ottawa. And of these case studies, we'll present this evening, 3 out of 4 of them are heritage designated. So our team has visited these projects and has had the opportunity to talk to the owners, the architects, and the project leaders to get really their unique and candid perspectives of these adaptive reuse projects, especially in terms of the challenges and barriers that arose during their construction. So the first case study that we'll take a look at is the former All Saints Anglican Church. The property, which is located in the mixed urban neighborhood of Sandy Hill, now offers venue spaces to host weddings and other celebrations, as well as corporate events. It also operates working title kitchen, which includes a bakery, a restaurant, and an outdoor patio. The adaptive reuse project was spearheaded by Leanne Musa, who was determined to continue the building's purpose as a gathering space for the community. So a bit about the building. All Saints Church dates back to 1900 when Sir Henry Newell Bates, the first chair of what is now known as the National Capital Commission, funded the construction of the Gothic Revival-style church. The church, not including Bate Hall, received designation for historical and architectural significance under Part 4 of the Ontario Act in 1998. The building functioned as a church up until 2016, when a group of investors led by Leanne Musa bought the property. What sets All Saints apart from many projects is that the community was involved throughout its entire length. The group of investors consists of 50% of Ottawa residents who recognize the socio-cultural importance of built heritage, and 50% is business investors. Leanne, along with consultants, has managed to make minimal changes to the building's architecture for its new function. That's not to say that it was an inexpensive and easy project. As of yet, about $2 million has been invested into All Saints, and the majority of that investment was put towards restoration work and essential structural, mechanical, and electrical maintenance for the building. There still remains essential work to be done to the former church, such as replacing the roof. There's also a large investment made in creating a patio along Laurier Street with careful consideration to make sure it fits within the existing building and within the neighborhood. There are plans currently underway to add a multi-purpose complex adjacent to the main building, which would occupy the northeast portion of the lot. And this addition is in collaboration with Trace Architects, Linebox Studio, Windmill Development Group, and the All Saints owners. Leanne Musa has expressed to us that this multi-purpose complex that will host residential, office, and commercial spaces is a necessary project to ensure All Saints remains a profitable investment for the owners, while also providing services needed for the neighborhood. So once again, the community was largely consulted for the massing proposals to ensure that All Saints remains a place that the community would adorn. The preliminary concepts assisted in this proposal of a zoning bylaw amendment, which was ultimately approved on the site in 2018 and has been in effect ever since. However, Leanne has expressed that the next phase of the project has encountered many challenges relating to adaptive reuse projects. So even though the proposed massing pays careful consideration and respect for the existing heritage, the rezoning process to allow the building to move forward has taken 2 years and around $200,000 to be approved. And this time and financial investment alone is not enough to discourage most people from pursuing the project. However, Leanne has highlighted that there are also steep property taxes for All Saints on top of other expenses. Luckily, Leanne has preserved to adapt All Saints Church despite the factors are mentioned and many more. And the community is grateful for this project. Local residents have expressed their support for the project, which is a wonderful example of an adaptive reuse project that has the community really at the heart of its approach. The transformation into a multi-purpose space showcases the socio-cultural advantages of adaptive reuse. And this heritage building rejuvenated community engagement, offering a setting for events and a restaurant, fostering inclusivity and sustained accessibility for the community. Churches are at their core of a gathering space, and All Saints will be able to host this role for generations to come. The next adaptive reuse case study is that of Flora Hall, which is a pub and brewery that transformed an abandoned industrial building on Flora Street at the corner of Bank Street. So Flora Hall was built in 1927 by the Welch and Johnston automotive firm, and for more than 50 years, the building housed the company's automotive radio repair business and other electrical services for cars and trucks. Afterwards, the occupants of the building included notably Cycle Savage, which was a biker garage from the 80s to the 90s, and then Uptown Automotive until 2005. The building sat empty until 2016, when Dave Longbottom, an engineer with a love for traveling and trying different watering holes, bought the property to make sure the new home for Flora Hall Brewing that serves as both a pub and a brewing space. Much like All Saints, Flora Hall's success comes from a local resident passionate about history and heritage, wanting to create spaces in the Ottawa community that will become markers for generations to come. Unlike All Saints, however, Flora Hall began as a relatively empty shell with only 4 walls and a mezzanine level above half of the plan. That being said, the project team did decide to keep the loft as it works well with the new program of a bar, while allowing a lot of height on the lower level of the brewing equipment. The building required mechanical, electrical, and structural upgrades, but also kept original features like glass block windows and wood ceiling joists. The facade of the building received repair work to the brick and mortar and some paint, and the exterior of the building has received heritage designation under the Ontario Heritage Act, and the boomtown style roof has even become an integral part of the branding of the company. Like All Saints, Dave Longbottom shared the many challenges he faced during the process of adaptively reusing the building. For one, the particularly unusual projects like the case of Flora Hall, which is an adaptive reuse project that also incorporates a brewery program, the process for permit obtention was long and slow, which is also expressed by Leanne Musa for All Saints. So Dave almost made an interesting comment about how the city of Ottawa's policies on property tax seemed to incentivize neglect while discouraging development. And he said this because the property taxes for the Flora Hall property, which were very low before construction, but as soon as the permit for the work was issued, not even when construction was completing, that the property taxes really skyrocketed. He also made the interesting observation that the city will make even more income in taxes with adaptive reuse projects because it increases the amount of people paying for parking around the building and stimulates urban development. In terms of cost subsidies available for heritage buildings, they felt that the process of obtaining a grant was far too comprehensive for the amount of the reward that they got. So they were granted less than 0.1% of the total renovation cost, which didn't really make any sort of impact. And Dave had also shared with us that it was difficult to get some professionals on board with reuse as well. And he actually explained that his hardwood contractor initially did not want to restore the hardwood floors on the loft level, and that Dave really needed to convince him in order to do it. The challenges that the project team have faced do seem to have paid off for Flora Hall. The pub is often full with guests, and the project received the City of Ottawa Heritage Award for the Best Adaptive Reuse Project in 2019. But one of the more interesting comments that Dave Longbottom made in reflecting about the project was that although he believed that the cost for adaptively reusing a building for this project were higher than that if the project were demolished and built anew, but he says that he would still choose to go in the adaptive reuse route, and he would do it again if he had to. And we found this comment quite interesting and important, and it's a commentary really on the current situation of adaptive reuse projects in Ottawa, because it shows that it sort of takes, sometimes it takes passionate individuals who see the value in our built heritage and who are really willing to invest more money into these projects for them to come to fruition. But that form of purely economical standpoint, most entrepreneurs would not choose to reuse. Looking at a larger scale case study, we'll be looking at the Innovation Center at Bayview Yards. This center is the first entrepreneurial hub of its kind in Ottawa. And the vision is to create a one-stop shop that brings together people who want to start or grow a business, as well as organizations and government agencies mandated to support them. So the original building for this reuse project is one of the former City of Ottawa workshop buildings, which was originally constructed in 1941 as part of a larger complex of city buildings. The industrial building served as a maintenance yard, workshop area, and storage. It was made from reinforced concrete and brick veneer, and the former industrial hub remains one of the few examples of the industrial area alongside railway tracks located between Scott Street and the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway. It was designated as a heritage building by the Heritage Ontario Act because of its industrial design influenced by modern style. And the shell was the only part that was designated. The interior and in addition were not within the designation criteria. So the Innovation Center was developed to encompass a multitude of different functions into one facility. By protecting the built heritage, the project team was able to retain 85% of the original structure while integrating many sustainable features, showcasing the potential for vacant industrial buildings, which are great fits really for adaptive reuse projects. In terms of the new additions, the architects were only allowed to add 600 square meters to the ground level, and they decided to add a level addition to central portion, which has a glass facade. And many preserved elements of the original building were reintroduced into the new spaces, allowing them to be reminders of the history and the heritage of the building. And these efforts allowed the building to gain LEED Gold certification in 2018. The Innovation Center differs from our previous two case studies in the source of its funding and ownership. So All Saints and Flora Hall were the initiatives of private local residents, but the Innovation Center was funded at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels with differing contributions. And we believe this was quite important to recognize that the Innovation Center project had more resources at its disposal than of the previous two case studies when we begin to compare the projects. And this does have an impact on the perception of challenges. That being said, the Innovation Center's adaptive reuse did not present barriers without zoning and permitting as well. The architects were only allowed to add 600 square feet to the ground level to avoid the need to submit a site plan application to the city, which would have significantly affected the time, the budget, and the scope of the project. And a more minor and almost comical zoning issue that encountered is that Invest Ottawa wanted to have an urban beehive on the roof, and they did for a while. But the city of Ottawa later said that they were not zoned for farm animals and they had to be removed. There was also decontamination work for asbestos and for paints with lead that was required, but it did not seem to have a significant effect on the project's success, and they were able to remove it effectively. In our conversation with Dan Henhofer, the architect claims that because they reused so much of the existing structure, the adaptive reuse approach was much faster than it would have been to build new for the Innovation Center. And in our conversation with Dave from Flora Hall, he would agree that his adaptive reuse project was also faster, but more costly in his case. And the architect had also shared that in his experience, the process of LEED certification for new construction and existing building renovation is similarly attainable. And this is an encouraging sentiment in the promotion of adaptive reuse projects. The final case study is the Slate Building, which was originally known as the Trebla Building, and it was constructed in 1970 as an office complex in the downtown Ottawa area. So in this case, it's a concrete structure with 11 stories, and it's the one case study that we're showing today that has no heritage designation, but it's still an important case study to observe as it really reinforces why we need to preserve buildings, even when they aren't evaluated to have any sort of characteristics necessarily deemed worthy of conservation. So in 2021, the building underwent a significant transformation. It was initiated by the owner and developer CLV Group Development Inc. and Interrent Right, with the collaboration of architects Linebox Studio as well. So the transformation aims to convert the office complex into a mixed-use residential complex, aligning with the urban policy goals of the city. The key objective of the adaptive reuse project was to activate Albert Street and provide quality housing in the downtown Ottawa district. The developers conducted an internal feasibility study indicating that the building could be repurposed to accommodate at least 150 apartment units. And in the process of doing so, they designed the ground floor to provide space for residents to use as a live-work space with amenities such as office space and a gym. So the concept of live work is really gaining relevance now that many companies have maintained a hybrid configuration for work where employees work from home and are in office maybe part-time. So offering a large business center as an intervention is something that now more and more residences are beginning to integrate. And since the building having been converted from an office building, the Slate really could easily facilitate that. And the double height space of the office building lobby created perfect opportunity for a very warm, welcoming entrance for the residents, as well as a breathable gym space, and allowed the business center to be very generous and host many residents simultaneously. Other key interventions can be found at the top floor, which was previously actually solely a mechanical space, and it was transformed into their sky lounge, which extends out into a rooftop terrace. So this space, which was initially strictly functional and architecturally hidden, was transformed into a theater area, seating, gaming space, and areas to host private parties. And being the last floor, it could also structurally accommodate new floor-to-ceiling windows to really open up the space. The architectural challenges also included maintaining the distribution ratio between various types of units that they wanted to integrate, such as studios, 1-bedroom, 1+den, and 2-bedroom apartments. So that being said, one of the biggest challenges they faced was adapting this very deep floor plate for residences. So creating a standard rectilinear floor plan was not feasible in this case, as units required specific programs and ample natural daylighting. And a way that the architects and developers resolved this issue was by steering away from the rectilinear and a very standard way of creating, rectilinear units. Instead, they created very jagged units. So in plan, it can appear quite bizarre. We can see here that we get units with these sort of zigzagging walls. But then upon visiting, we noticed that it actually created really nice spaces that had lots of daylighting where needed. So we can see that in this instance for this unit, the entrance is away from the rest of the unit, which creates a very nice private entrance space. The washer and dryer is also far from the bedrooms, which is good for sound purposes. And there's also a little extra cove for private den and office space. In this unit too, this next unit, we can see similar segregation, but we can see how much daylighting the bedrooms, kitchen, and living room have access to. When we start looking at photos, we can see that since the ceilings are quite high due to its previous office occupancy, it makes for these really nice bright rooms and living spaces and kitchen spaces. So while the absence of awards doesn't provide a clear indicator of success, it is important to evaluate the project based on its adherence to its initial objectives. So the project really aimed to enhance the pedestrian environments of Albert Street and to promote mixed use within the area. Currently, the project is almost fully rented. And we also learned in discussion with the developers, we asked if they would consider doing another adaptive reuse project similar to that of the Slate, and they enthusiastically confirmed that they would, and they were in the process of inquiring about owning another office building within the area to convert to residences. So when regarding case studies and approaches to adaptive reuse, our team at Carleton has found it quite critical to broaden our perspective outside of just the Canadian context and to observe and learn what maybe other countries are doing. So for instance, recently, we've had the honor to present our research at the International Adaptive Reuse Symposium titled As Found in Belgium this past September. And we presented our research on the Canadian context and had significant takeaways from examples derived from the European context. So to demonstrate an example, the opening lecture was presented by Anne Lacaton, which is the founder of the 2021 Pritzker Prize-winning firm Lacaton & Vassal. Anne, who's a strong advocate for working with the existing, she presented some of her work from their firm, and I'd like to extract a particular quote she read, which inspired the project that I'll present afterward. So she read, "Make with the existing, with everything already there, to invent or reinvent with what we have in hand, to transform with minimum material, with economy, intelligence, kindness, to do more with less." So this quote, "to work with the existing, notably with kindness," inspired the transformation of a social housing complex, which had 530 dwellings in Bordeaux, France. And the architects aimed to redefine the qualities of comfort of these dwellings while also maintaining their existing structure and while also maintaining that all the residents could stay within these spaces during their transformation and not have to be rehoused or find different housing. And so although it's not explicitly a project of adaptive reuse, the change in quality of these spaces is so significant and truly adapted a building of what was previously of quite poor condition to one of exception. So one of the central strategies employed was the addition of what they call extended winter gardens and balconies to each apartment. So this architectural intervention served multiple purposes. It allowed for increased natural lighting, enhanced fluidity of use, and also provided residents with improved views. And due to the low topography of Bordeaux, the panoramic views from the inside of these buildings were quite extraordinary, and they made quite exceptional living spaces. The project aimed to achieve these enhancements in a generous, economical, and sustainable manner. So the extensions, primarily in the form of these large winter gardens, offered residents outdoor living spaces, which is akin to those found in what you would find in a house. So these spaces were designed with careful attention to detail, with some balconies extending as far as 3.8 meters on south facades. And this strategy aims to improve not only the aesthetics, but also the functionality and maintenance cost of the buildings. In a broader context, the project served as a prime example of how social housing, which is often criticized in its perceived shortcomings, could undergo a very meaningful and economic transformation. And the result was a collection of dwellings that were generous, pleasant, and high-performing. And the transformation not only renewed the typologies and living conditions, but also contributed positively to the urban dwelling landscape of Bordeaux. And more impressively, it managed to do so without relocating its residents through a phased approach, which led through extensive community consultation with its inhabitants. One of the many takeaways from conference in Belgium, was a large opportunity for implementation in the Canadian context, is within educating students in architectural education on working with existing buildings. So very quickly, within the Canadian context, it's very rare within architectural education that we work with existing buildings, but it was very interesting to learn that this is quite common practice within Europe, and that studios are offering courses where architecture students are not beginning from scratch and from a clean slate, but instead are working with existing buildings. So overall, the themes presented throughout the conference displayed distinguishing factors between drivers and barriers present within the European versus Canadian context. And the subjects surrounding many European presentations were not those advocating for the necessity of adaptive reuse for environmental or economic benefits. Most of the European projects were driven by the need for heritage preservation and cultural sustainability. So although Canada may appear behind in terms of adaptive reuse, lacking from common practice, Canada is quite forward-thinking when regarding considerations such as community engagement, sustainable and environmental considerations. So I'll leave closing remarks to Melissa.
So in some from the case studies, by looking at all of these different ones across Kent in Ottawa and internationally, we're able to see that there's a lot of variation in which barriers and benefits are experienced by which projects. In all, the benefits and barriers need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis due to the variety of factors such as location, typology, compatibility of new use, size, and other things, emphasizing the importance of understanding each of these roles in how they affect the quality of the end product. Regardless, all 4 case studies that we've looked at contribute to the quality in the built environment as successful cases which, enhanced by their architectural charm, have revitalized previously deteriorating buildings with vibrant new spaces for living, working, and gathering. So being in this grant, we found that most of the people working in quality are mostly focused on new construction. This is why in our research, we've been exploring different ways to alter this approach so building views can become more widely understood and accepted as a means of achieving quality in the built environment, and which is worth the changes in policies and cultural mindsets to make it happen. If you'd like to contribute to our research, we invite you to check out our survey link, which has been shared, and share any building conversion projects that you know of. This can be anywhere in Canada as we're developing our nationwide inventory. And so we'll be looking at other cities and provinces next. We also really value the collaboration with partners and community members, which has been really vital to capitalizing on collective knowledge and really making this inventory something useful and putting together our research throughout the entire year. Next week, we'll be continuing the conversation during a CAP workroom we're hosting at the National Trust Conference on October 26th, where we'll be discussing with a variety of building professionals about how building use can become a key player in climate action and housing creation from a variety of perspectives. This includes the developer perspective, policymakers, architects, and anyone else who is a stakeholder in these kind of conversations. So lastly, we'd like to thank Heritage Ottawa for inviting us to share our research with you all and for being a partner throughout the process. Also a big shout out to our other research partners and our professional and community collaborators who have contributed their time through interviews, research, and filling out our survey. So we look forward to seeing where this research takes us in the next 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa and Dana. That was amazing. What a great project to be working on. What a great team. Mariana, did you have a couple other things you want to mention before we get to the Q&A? And just a reminder, everybody, you can type in your questions in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll get to those in a moment. But Mariana?
No, the question is only like the people, the audience that is here, if they have any adaptive reuse project that they want to share, I will be super happy and grateful to that. So we have the survey, so you can let us know anything, please. Thank you.
Great, and I'm sure you're aware there are other academic research projects on adaptive reuse, and I'm sure you're probably aggregating a lot of that into your own project as well, especially, I know, the Places of Faith work. There's another group, SSHRC-funded project working specifically on that. One thing is, some questions are starting to come in, and I'll just ask. One thing that was really interesting, and Melissa, you hint when you presented, you talked about how sometimes, you know, the awards for heritage projects are too heritagey. I mean, and for you didn't say it like that, but the idea that the notion that us as a heritage community have to really wake up in that we have to realize successful readaptive reuse projects has to consider more than just the aesthetics of a conservation project that we're more traditionally used to. And so to that end, I really was interested in your post-occupancy portion of your evaluation where, and I'm just wondering how that's actually working out and how you're finding that's working, where projects of an adaptive reuse project wasn't exactly meant to address necessarily social inclusions or other parts of what we really are now recognizing as quality. How are you finding that methodology working? Is it hard to actually do those evaluations after the fact, after a project? And I'm not sure either Dana, Melissa, or Mariana.
Do you want to jump in, Mariana?
Yeah, well, that's something that it's good that you caught that, the post-occupancy. It's something that we, when we were looking the standards and guidelines, we thought, yes, that's a very good thing, but we need to look into if those adaptive reuse have been really working properly, even that the ones that we are looking is just in the 10 years. So of course, all those buildings had to have a lot about accessibility, like because it's quite has to be in the last 10 years. But yes, definitely this, when we were looking some of the projects, we have seen that some of the projects, they, just to say as an example, they won certain certification, but after 2 or 3 years of use, they have to modify certain things because in the daily base of the use of that space, they needed that particular space that was just to say for bikes, to say something. So definitely we have been looking that the post-occupancy is gonna, how can I say, flag certain things that probably 5 years they thought that was a very good thing, but looking into that, it's gonna be really see if there has been working properly or not. So to be honest, like we are not an expert in post-occupancy, but one another researcher from University Metropolitan Toronto, they have done a lot of research on post-occupancy. So we met and they were explaining us how they have done, like with a methodology to say something, and then that's what we are applying. So we have been just started working with this since June, but definitely it's really, really important, that part. That's what is going to be telling us if the adaptive reuse has been successful or not.
Okay, great, thank you. Did you, Dana or Melissa, want to jump in on that? Or because we have a whole bunch of other questions that have come in. I don't see you unmuting yourselves. A couple interesting questions. Well, one just at a personal level, they're saying, are there any of the federal government buildings in Ottawa that you guys think in particular might lend themselves well to an adaptive reuse? Now that you guys are starting to get to know the Ottawa buildings, are there any of the federal government buildings that you think might be lend themselves to an adaptive reuse?
Are you referring to like some of the vacant federal buildings that are currently in question? Yeah, I think we haven't looked super closely at evaluating each of those vacant buildings. I know that there are some other studies going on to really figure out if some of those are compatible to something like a residential conversion or event space. But I think they're definitely worth more evaluation, especially the office buildings and their typologies of the form that they have and kind of their window typology have really been pointed out as possible for residential conversions. So I think based on our research so far, it's definitely possible.
Just to add something with Melissa, Taylor Kibble, that is the engineer and conservation student, she's working right now in her thesis on federal buildings. That's what she's looking. So as soon as she will, so she has been working a lot about the federal buildings. Yeah.
So she'll be adding hers to your.
Yes, because she's part of the team.
Yeah, and just to add quickly to that too, we're working also with currently right now there are studies going on led by the federal government of reevaluating their disposal process of these buildings. So some key points of that, for example, are that once a building becomes vacant and no longer of use for the federal government, they first see if Indigenous communities would like to take on those buildings. And then depending on if that's the case, and they have a certain amount, I think up to a year to be able to take part in that process. And then afterwards, it might get sold or it might go through a process of demolition. So all of these little steps that these buildings go through are being reevaluated by the federal government. So we're trying to work closely with them to see if there's a way that we can integrate adaptive reuse as part of that process. And if so, how that would be done. So there aren't any specific, like Melissa mentioned, there aren't any specific buildings that are being looked at right now by at least our research team, but the whole process in itself of disposing of these buildings is being reevaluated.
Okay, thanks. Somebody dropped in some information for you guys, a University of Michigan project, which might be of interest to you. But another question about, maybe this is for Mariana, about your partners. You mentioned a couple times what kind of either organizations, you're probably not looking at for individuals, but what kind of organizations, who are your partners are you looking for?
So like we have, already we have Heritage Conservation Services. So we have federal institution. We have Heritage Ottawa, National Trust, City of Ottawa. And we have architectural firms that they wanted to participate. We have been also looking in NGOs. So honestly, like anybody, like we don't have any prerequisite, only is if you want to be working with us, of course you have to share information. But so far, like developers, like I think that we are getting a momentum. Right now is with Ottawa, but like we have expanded. So Canadian Association Heritage Professional, CAP, that is whole Canada. We have members that are helping us. When a few months ago, we were in Calgary. We met with the people from Calgary. Also, Association Preservation Technology is also one of our partners. ECOMOS is also our partner. So we can say it's from the municipality, from local to international. So anybody that wants to join, please send me an email. I will be happy. And normally we met between 2 or 3 times per year. We do roundtables. Some of those roundtables is online. So anywhere in Canada that you want to participate, that would be absolutely so. And so yes, please, thank you anybody that wants to join.
Anybody's welcome.
Yeah, that wants to work. It's because at the same time it's the community who is helping this exchange of information.
Okay, another great question. to challenge all us urbanites. What about rural, adaptive reuse in rural contexts? Are you guys trying to include, I know obviously probably Places of Faith will be one that will cover some aspects of rural buildings, but are you trying to identify case studies of adaptive reuse in rural locations?
Yes, we so far, and I saw the first question was about that. To be honest, we haven't talked anything about, we haven't studied rural like in detail, but absolutely we will, like it's something that we needed, like it's part of and that's what also in the selection we have been trying to look different type of buildings, but also different ownerships. We have also, that's why we also selected not only heritage buildings with highly designation, no, could be any existing buildings to open that sector. So yes, the people that, the woman that said about rural, yes, please send us an email and we can contact you, and in the future we are looking case studies, different case studies. So yes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether your methodology needs to be adapted slightly in terms of the evaluation, the criteria for rural locations, because I know there are people, the participants that are here that are specialists in rural, rural heritage. So you might hopefully you'll hear from them. There are a whole bunch of questions, and we only have a few minutes left. Actually, there was one question about the Sir John A. Macdonald building, that is still its name, on Wellington Street, that you showed in your case study, Dana. Does the fact that it doesn't have public access, or quite limited public access, in terms of the impact of of the other factors of social inclusion and as a quality project, does that factor in your analysis or your thinking on is it a successful and a quality project?
Yeah, that's a good point. Often when we look at institutional buildings, it is something that is a bit of a hindrance because often they're very close to certain groups of people. However, I would say that often when we are looking at these buildings, for example, another example is the Global Center for Pluralism. So this building is a government building, but when they did their adaptive reuse project, what was quite interesting was that they made the building accessible. So previously there were no ramps to be able to access the building, and there were no spaces really for gathering. So in that case, when the building is of use for maybe something that allows for more conversation or discussion within the program, then allowing it to be updated to sort of today's current standards of accessibility and inclusivity do get considered when buildings are converted. In the case of the Sir John A. Macdonald, maybe Melissa can talk specifically about that building.
Yeah, I think like that consideration was definitely something that we have in our case study, like when we're looking at the social cultural impacts and considerations. So for this one, we did have to take into consideration that it's a federal project, and perhaps without the federal government taking on that project and deciding to use it, maybe it wouldn't have been used or adapted in the way that it has, or in such a award-winning manner, I guess, with the funds that are being put into it and how it's being used. But that does mean that there's higher security requirements and that they haven't been able to open it up. So there are some kind of trade-offs for this kind of project, and it is something that we're considering. That's why, like, for the number of case studies that we've selected to really go more in depth with, we've tried to show a variety of projects that show that are very strong in different aspects, but are still relatively well-rounded. So this one, maybe the social cultural aspect of inclusivity is kind of lower, but it's higher on other aspects. And it's the only federal project that we're including as well. To get a better idea of kind of how adaptive reuse works in other situations and more integrated into the community.
Thank you. There are tons and tons of questions here flashing in front of my screen. Your presentation and your project is stimulating lots of discussion. I myself have a bunch more questions as well that I'm just curious about your relationship with the other clusters in the broader project, because as a heritage community, we're always trying to influence them, those other people thinking about these other things. And we also have so much to learn from them. So this is a really excellent project. You guys will get these questions. So you may, this may actually, some of the questions may be useful to you. There's some suggestions in here, but some questions that you may think to raise in the next time you present this. And I'll just do another plug for that. The fact that you will be having the next session at the conference, the National Trust and CAP, the Canadian Association of Professional Heritage Professionals conference that's happening here in Ottawa next week. So you'll be doing a session. There are a number of questions about your email and getting in touch with you. Participants, not to worry, we'll send out the email where the best way to get in touch with the project team. We'll send that out to everybody so that they have it, so they can stay in touch and have other questions. Lots of suggestions for projects and a bunch of other great questions. But we are a little bit over time already. So I will, with that, I will pass those questions on to you guys. You can deal with them. And I want to thank you again, Melissa and Dana and Mariana, for doing this presentation. This has been really great project. Good luck with it. And we hopefully, maybe we'll hear more, because this is a 5-year project. So we want to hear you guys maybe next year again, or to see how it's going, how it's evolving, because this is such an important question for all of us, the management of our built environment and ensuring quality. So thank you again. Thank you all of you for your questions and all your participation. And we will see you next month. I don't remember the date and title of the next month's lecture series, but you'll be hearing from us if you're members. Thank you again, and good night, everybody.